Well, it's time now for perspective. There's an almost constant rumbling debate in developed nations about how much money they should be committing each year to international aid, alongside an equally predictable commentary about how international aid often gets its priorities and methods wrong. So is there a better way of making sure that help isn't just well-intentioned, but also effective? My guest today is Séverine Autesserre, former humanitarian aid worker and professor of political science at Columbia University. She's also the author of The Frontlines of Peace. Thank you so much for being with us on France 24 today. Now, you've been involved in the world of international aid for more than 2 decades, I think. Could you start by telling us what NGOs, government departments, have historically got wrong when it comes to international aid?
Of course, there are many NGOs and departments, but the important point is that we cannot talk about an entire NGO, an entire department. It's the leadership often of the French Foreign Affairs Ministry, the United States, where I am Foreign Affairs Ministry, or the UK, the United Kingdom, etc., the leadership of the United Nations. But when you look within each organization, you find a lot of people who try to do things differently and who actually get things right.
And what are the things that can be got right? Where can you make the most positive change?
Well, the most positive change is when you try to not use the standard approach. The standard approach is working with leaders, with elites, with government in capital cities and headquarters, and ignoring grassroots local actors, ordinary citizens on the ground. Well, in fact, when you look at what actually works in conflict zones, you see that the initiatives are all grassroots initiatives that are led by local people, including ordinary people, including former and current combatants, and that build on the specific histories, politics, and cultures of the societies, and sometimes that are supported by outsiders like you and I, but outsiders who have a different approach, who are humble, who are respectful, and who don't think that they know better and that they have the right theories and skills and expertise.
And is it significantly harder to access these grassroots organisations than it is to access, for example, governments and businesses? Sometimes because governments and elites are based in capital cities, and so you take a flight and it's really easy to go there. To access some of the grassroots actors, you have to go to the countryside, you have to go to towns that are out of the way, but some of them are based in capital cities. But the thing is that it's not as if they were rare people that you have to take a 10-hour trip to go and meet. These are people that I've found all over the world. Really, truly, I've found incredible people and communities who manage to build peace on an everyday basis in the middle of the most horrible circumstances, in the midst of the deadliest conflict since World War II in Congo, in Afghanistan, in Colombia, in Israel and the Palestinian territory, in Somalia. So you can find effective grassroots activists really literally all over the world, and also in our own societies, in France, in the United States. And the outsiders who come to help and who do things differently and who are actually effective, we also find them everywhere, in capital cities, in rural areas, and again, working for all kinds of different organizations and all kinds of foreign affairs ministries. You mentioned a lot of entrenched conflicts just there. Could you maybe give us one concrete example of a time when a grassroots initiative has really led to the fostering of peace in a community?
Of course, because the Frontlines of Peace is all about all of these stories. So let me give you my favorite example. Okay, it's the case of Somaliland. There is a really, really interesting contrast between, on the one hand, you have Somalia, that is very violent, has some of the highest rankings in the least desirable category, like most corrupt country, etc. And on the other hand, you have this autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is called Somaliland.
land and that has experienced no violence or very little violence for the past 20 years, has a well-functioning state, decent public services, and even some kind of functioning democracy. They just had local elections. And when you look at the reasons for the difference, you see that the usual top-down, outsiders-led approach has prevailed all the time in the rest of Somalia, while Somaliland has benefited from sustained, very grassroots peace-building initiatives that were led by Somalilanders themselves, by insiders.
And when we're talking about donations from wealthier nations, how do you go about aligning the priorities of donor countries with the needs on the ground? Because presumably they aren't always the same.
They aren't always the same, but often they match. Very often, priorities for donor countries require peace to be on the ground. You need peace to conduct businesses. You need peace to implement democracy. You need peace to promote, public health, so that we don't have this kind of big pandemics that we're living through right now. So peace is absolutely essential as a precondition for a lot of the priorities that donors are trying to promote all around the world.
And there is often, as I mentioned earlier, a rumbling debate in developed countries about what percentage of GDP should go to international aid. Is there any easy answer to that, do you think?
Yes, there is an easy answer to that. The answer is that we're already spending a lot of money, but we're not spending it right. We're using it on top-down efforts, on working with governments, with leaders, on financing these big conferences that really arrive in peace agreements, and the peace agreements make no difference on the ground. So we're using the money wrong, and there is a better way to use the money. The grassroots efforts that I was telling you about, they are much cheaper than these big elite conferences. With $50,000, I document an initiative that reestablished peace in 300 villages in Congo. I document other initiatives where an entire village managed to think about the future and to live in peace for $5,000, like 4,200 euros, something like that. So the money, we have a lot of money in international aid, and of course, more money would be better. But already, if we could use the money that we already have in a way that support grassroots efforts and that support the extraordinary individuals and communities who really make a difference, both on the ground and at the highest level.
Fascinating and inspiring stuff. I'm so sorry. We do have to leave it there. We could, of course, talk about this for a very long time, but we have run out of time. Séverine Autesserre, former humanitarian aid worker and professor of political science at Columbia University. She's also the author of The Frontlines of Peace, recently published. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on France 24 today.